Welcome to the Beware the Moon podcast. My name is Hannah. Today we're going to be talking about a movie that came out this year, just a couple months ago, called Stopmotion. Honestly, I was very excited watching this movie, and I thought it was very good, and I still think it's very good. I enjoyed my first watch through a lot. However, there is some disturbing subject matter in it, and I think looking into the story behind the story is also interesting and all that stuff. That's very, very cool. However, if you're not a fan of like self-harm stuff, if that kind of triggers you, this movie's definitely a skip because there's some very gruesome self-harm stuff going on in this movie. And that's kind of what made my second watch through a little bit tougher. I think if you're going to watch this movie, know as little about it as possible. It's definitely a lot better of an experience when you have no idea what's coming next. I think probably the next time I watch this one would be with someone who has never watched it, just to see their reaction to it. But personally, I've watched it twice, and I don't feel the need to ever watch it again. And that's not to say it's not a good movie. It's definitely a good movie. Absolutely love this movie. It's just not something that is necessarily, I don't want to say enjoyable. It's definitely not joyful. I think that's the best way to describe it. There's very little about this movie that is funny. There's not much relief to it. It's a very emotionally taxing film. I think probably a big reason this movie is so emotionally taxing is because the subject matter and then also the character herself and what she's going through. The basic storyline is that our main character, Ella, she is the daughter of a very successful, very famous stop-motion animator. And so the beginning of the movie starts off with her mother, who is extremely arthritic, is trying to finish her last film before she dies. And she's using Ella to do that. And in the middle of that, so like right away, pretty much, right from the start of the movie, we have the mom has a seizure and then never comes out of it. So Ella is going through this crisis of her mother is not around anymore, and also on top of her mother not being around, she's also trying to still be creative and find her own voice, which she's never been allowed to do because her mother is very oppressive. And so it's just heavy story matter, generally speaking. I have to say that the sound design for this movie is amazing, the stop motion in this movie is amazing, the acting in this movie is amazing, and just the weird vibes this movie takes on and then permeates are just, it's very specific, and maybe that's the other reason it's so emotionally taxing, but it's definitely, like I said, it's worth the watch. It's good, it's just emotionally taxing. So the movie starts with this egg intercut with the credits and stop motion cuts of our main character Ella with different lighting. Her mom is working on this Cyclops animation, and so you get all these different scenes with the Cyclops and the mother and the daughter Ella is moving it this way and that way, and they're taking pictures and they're, looking through them and, deciding what works and what doesn't. And then that night, she's making dinner for her mom and makes steak. And her mom says a bit smaller poppet, which poppet is, I guess, like a very British thing. Personally, I'm American, so I don't know how prevalent it is over there. However, it is stated by the director that they purposely had the actress who plays the mother switch between saying puppet and poppet, because her mom later just out and out accuses her of being a puppet and having no creativity of her own. So that kind of, we see that here real quick, right away. Ella offers to help her mom come up with some ideas, and the mom is just a bitch about it. I can't even describe how uncomfortable and painful it is, but you can see that she wants to, like, she's like a little baby bird trying to spread her little wings, and the mom is just like hits her with a fucking net, a fly swatter, whatever, and just like smacks her down. And it's so sad, and just like you get right away that she's an oppressive presence for our main character, Ella. And so Ella says that, and the mom like says nothing, and then the next day, yeah, she tries to get some ideas out of Ella. Ella says nothing, probably out of fear, and the mom like pats her hand, and we can see that her fingers are all fucked up. She's battling arthritis, among other things. And then that night, Ella goes out to meet with her boyfriend, Tom, and some lady friends. One of them does stop motion too, apparently. And I think it's so funny because the director has a lot of shorts in stop motion. So if you go on YouTube, you can find The Cat with Hands. Very good stop motion, just short film. And so he kind of creates this world in which stop motion can be a full-time occupation. And typically that's not the case. You know, people like Phil Tippett are few and far between. And if you don't know who that is, just Google him. You'll understand. So Ella is at this table, and her friend is showing, oh, we did this recently and we did that recently, and you can tell Ella is like feeling some things about that. She goes that night to her boyfriend's house. Obviously they do their thing, wakes him up by pinching his nose, which comes back in the end. She pinches his nose and tells her she needs to get back before her mom wakes up, so he drives her. And then we get a little bit of exposition about how the mom is legendary in stop motion. She's got arthritis. And Tom asks her, like, well, don't you want to do your own film? You know, have your own voice? And she's like, I don't have one. Like, I don't know what that is. Which kind of speaks to the issue she's having throughout this movie. So, literally the moment she lies down, it's time to get up, which would be fucking miserable. And clearly Ella's frustrated with her mom. That morning she doesn't cut her steak for her mom, and her mom is like really pointedly like staring at her and like biting into the steak and so she asks if she's tired or grumpy, and Ella says she's fine. And then the mom like does a total like flip. Like before she was just kind of like passive aggressive, but she goes full on aggressive and is like, all I want is to finish this film before I die. Is that such a burden to you? And like, yes, like literally she's like making these demands that are like, head move left 1 millimeter, and you're like, I would end myself if I had to be in this working environment with this bitch. Like, that is a lot to ask of me. Thank you. So as she's making these demands this morning, the lights start to flicker, and the mom's like, don't you dare move, don't move. And then the lights go out, and then we get a mom jump scare, and then she's kind of blep. She goes to the hospital. Apparently the nurse is like, she's had a seizure, and Ella says that her mom doesn't look real, which I think is interesting, because the themes of this movie, which I will get more into later, are kind of necromancy, which is what the director has out and out said, bringing something dead to life, and then also finding your own voice and what it is that you want to do are kind of like the main themes of this film. So after she's done at the hospital, she goes to Tom's house, and he runs her a bath, which is very sweet and supportive. And as she's bathing, the lights kind of go like a yellowish green, and she comes out in like a daze with just a towel on and sees her mom lying on the floor. And then her mom looks at her, and then it like cuts and like, or flashes really, and then the mom is just meat. And then the light goes normal again, and we're, at Tom's house again. So then that night, Ella's kind of like feeling the burden, maybe just the itch of making something, the desire to make something. And so she tells Tom, like, I need to finish it. So the next day he takes her to an apartment building, and it's really hard. I did not catch it on my first watch. But my second watch, he says most people have evacuated this building because they're going to be gutting the place. So he kind of works for, it's not like really detailed because we're focused on Ella literally this entire movie. We spend no time with anyone else. So, well, I mean, unless she's there with them. So we don't get like a full description of what he does, but we can tell it has to do with like real estate management shit. So he's showing her rooms and stuff, and he's like, they're all the same. And she's like, clearly does not agree with him, goes over to one that's like speaking to her, and she's like, can I see this one? And so that's the one she chooses. And then Tom is like, you should come back to my place at night. And Ella's like, no. And he's like, I can stay with you. And she's like, no, you'll just distract me. And he's like, no, I'm not gonna distract you. And then starts like trying to make out with her, and she's like, yeah, bullshit. And then he's like, okay, fine, I'll just bring you dinner later, like we can have dinner. And she's like, cool. So then she's bringing all her equipment, which is a ass load of equipment. Like, why did she not just like pick an apartment on the first floor? No, she picked one on like the third fucking floor, or fifth or seventh or some shit. So she's like trying to get her stuff up these stairs, and there's a little girl in her way. And so Ella's like, what a fucking weirdo, but like goes past the little girl. She's like, excuse me. And the little girl moves out of the way, and she's like, just like obnoxiously slurping this empty juice box, and it's all like that kind of sound where it's just like, please stop. Oh my god, it's empty, stop. And so Ella's like in her apartment and hears the little girl singing. So she goes to the stairwell and like looks down and sees people looking back up at her. And it's just like a couple, and they're like, the guy is staring at her, and they're clearly like leaving. And so that's kind of giving us more background to this place. Like, she really is very, very alone in this building, period. So after this, we get the Cyclops movie is set up in Ella's new flat, and she's working this ball of what we find out is mortician's wax. And basically, mortician wax, the director chose it specifically because of what it relates to. And when the little girl asks Ella tells the little girl, like, the morticians use it to make bodies look a little bit better when the families want to come and look at them. So as she's like working this mortician wax, the little girl's outside singing again, and it's getting louder and distracting her. So she goes out there to confront this little girl and tell her to shut the fuck up. But instead she doesn't. The girl rushes into the hallway from the stairwell, and then rushes into Ella's apartment, basically. Like, this little girl doesn't even, like, invite herself in. She just intrudes, like, straight up just walks in there. She's like, what are you doing? And just goes in, which, like, wow, little girl, zero fear. Like, she could be a murderer. You have no idea. This bitch just moved in when everyone was moving out. Why are you... What? No stranger danger? Okay. Ella explains to her, though, that she's doing stop motion, and she's like, oh, you're making a cartoon. And she's like, no, it's not a cartoon, it's stop motion. And then Ella explains how it works, and where you move it, click, and then you put it all together and it moves. And the little girl's like, yeah, that's a cartoon. Such a little bitch. And then the little girl also asks her, like, well, why bother? Like, that sounds like a lot of work. And she says, because I like it and I'm good at it, and it feels like you're bringing something to life. And so she goes on to explain to the little girl the story that her mom wanted to tell, and it's about this Cyclops who gave up one of her eyes to see her future. And of course, because everybody dies, she ends up seeing her own death. And so I think that's the real, like, underlying reason why this is so hard for Ella to do, because this story, like I said, is about necromancy. It's about bringing something dead to life, whereas the mom wants to tell a story about something you're bringing to life dying and staying dead. And so that does not sit well with Ella, and it doesn't appeal to her. Like, and the little girl says, Ella shows her the film, and the little girl goes, it's a bit boring. And she asks the little girl, well, how do I make it better? And then the little girl burps at her. And I'm like, why is this little girl such a, like, I just want to punt her. But she tells her, make a new one, like, make a better story. And she's like, oh, you've got ideas? And she's like, the little girl is like, yeah, I do. And she goes, there's a girl in the woods, and she's scared. And Ella's like, why is she scared? And she's like, because she's lost, and there's someone coming. And then Ella's like, well, who's coming? And she doesn't really give a reply. The little girl is like, oh, you should make the little girl in my story out of the mortician wax. And Ella is like, get the fuck out of here, kid. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're interrupting me. You're a pain in my ass. Boots her out of there. And then thinks about what she said. And as she's like fiddling with the mortician's wax, we can see that the Cyclops is watching her from the computer screen, it seems. It doesn't like move, but just like the way it's set up on the laptop, it's like watching her. So Ella is like lost in thought as Tom enters, and she realizes when he starts talking to her that she's destroyed the Cyclopses and has instead made the little girl out of mortician wax and a forest. And so she like is at the computer and she replays what she's done so far, and it's very good, very spooky, good sound design, and it's always like this like moist sounding stuff, and it's just it gives you a real distinct feeling. And I hate it and love it at the same time. So Tom's like, you need a break, but she doesn't really seem to hear him. He shows her the steak he brought her, but she's like not interested. It's like this raw steak. He's like, look at this, I'm gonna cook this. And she's like, and keeps watching the story. And the next day she wakes up alone and finds Tom's note that he's gone to work, which, whatever, she doesn't give a fuck. She goes to visit her mom at the hospital, and then like it's kind of one of those moments where she's like trying to make a decision, and then we see the decision is made. She's throwing out all the Cyclops stuff, she's putting it on the curb, she's saying fuck that, we're making live things, we're doing making the dead come to life, not making the life things we made come to death, or whatever, mom, we're doing it my way. So she goes back upstairs, and we see that Tom's sister is there, and Tom's sister is the one specifically who was like showing off her stop motion stuff at the bar. So she's like wanting to know, she's like, oh, you know, Tom told me what's going on, I just wanted to check on you. And she's like, oh, I'm good. And it's like really awkward, and she's like, what you got going on over there? Like how I say to my nephews when they're doing something that I'm like, is that good or bad? I'm not sure. And so Ella's like super reluctant, but invites her in and shows her. And the sister's really intrigued. She goes, what are you on? And she's like, nothing. And she goes, I get my best ideas when I'm tripping my tits off, which is the funniest. I don't even know, man. But whatever. The sister, whatever. As she's leaving, the little girl comes up the stairs, and it's important to note that like the sister is looking up at Ella, and Ella is looking down at the little girl, and literally Tom's sister and the little girl pass each other but don't acknowledge each other, which is really weird. But she comes in and barges in again, and Ella just like lets this child invade her space, even though like as an adult, if I'm alone with a strange child, first of all, that's just actually not happening, because like I don't want anyone to think weird things, but whatever. I guess Ella does not care about that. The little girl comes in and she's like, oh, you're making my film. And Ella's like, well, really, it's my film. Which, sure. The little girl doesn't like how the wax girl looks. She's like, she doesn't look real enough. And Ella's like, you told me to do it like this. And she's like, hang on, and goes and gets that uncooked steak. And she's like, you should make a new girl out of this. And she's like, it's raw meat, dead meat. And she goes, so you can bring it to life. Again, just hammering home that like necromancy kind of stuff. And it's so weird too, because like it's raw meat, and it's not like they actually used raw meat for the film. The director was like, you can't do that, like you have to do everything in one day with raw meat, or you just do something that looks like raw meat. So they just did like additions to the wax that made it look like raw meat was under there. And it's also interesting to note that Ella's like, well, she won't look the same, I'll have to do everything over again. And the little girl's like, no, you don't have to do that, like she could just be growing up or some shit, like who cares, it's your story, you can tell it however you want. And I think that is also like, it's also really telling about the story that's actually like, yes, the the hidden meaning behind all of this is necromancy and your work coming to life, and, you know, your creativity taking on its own life and that life taking over your life. But then, like, also there's this story going on that the little girl is telling about this girl in the woods. And I think it directly relates to something that happened to Ella, which Ella has been told, you're a puppet, like, and the mom reiterates that later on. So, a puppet doesn't have its own voice, it doesn't have its own will, it's not allowed to talk back, per se. So, that speaks to me about what's actually going on in this story. And I will get more into that later. The little girl tells Ella to do it, like, make a new girl out of this meat and wax, and I'll tell you the next part. So Ella starts doing that, and the little girl says that the girl in the woods runs away, and she finds a house, so she decides to hide in it. And Ella's like, oh, that's good. Maybe there's, like, a wolf after her or something, but the little girl says, no, it's a man no one wants to meet. He comes on 3 nights, knocking on the door. And Ella asks what he wants, but then the little girl changes the topic to the figure, and she's like, oh, that looks so nice, blah, blah, blah. And I'm, like, so frustrated about this little girl. I'm like, focus. We have questions. I need answers. Ella, why are you not making her focus? But Ella's also getting distracted, so she goes to, like, do the next scene, and I want to say that the production name, because, like, we see her, like, doing, you know, the production and then the scene and all that stuff, and the production's name is Me, which I think is also super important. So we get to see all the stuff the little girl said playing out with, like, the little figures, and the little figure hides in a room, and, like, she hides in this house, and there's no other rooms in this house, and it's just red on the inside. And the man that, like, comes up and knocks on the door is, like, super, super creepy. So then, you know, Ella's like, you know, who is this guy? What do we call him? And the little girl sprinkles ashes over the figure and says, ashes to ashes. And she's like, the Ash Man. And it's so weird because when she says ashes to ashes, Ella's the one who replies, the Ash Man, as if she's like, yes, this makes perfect sense. And, like, no, I'm very confused. But to these two, it makes sense, which plays into the end, to further on in the story. So Ella gets on the phone with Tom and asks him not to tell his sister what she's doing. And it's like, the conversation seems to go well. And the conversation actually ends with her offering to have lunch with him the next day. So then we get a quick replay of the Ashman bit as Ella is in bed and she hears knocking, which, of course, it's the Ashman himself. And, of course, she doesn't realize what that is, so she, like, gets up and goes to answer the door. And she looks through the apartment's peephole and doesn't see anyone, so then she opens it, which is, like, so fucking dumb, personally. But then the hallway door opens, and it's the little girl with the creepy mask on. And she burps at Ella, then drags her outside to a dead fox. And it's like, it's been very dead for a while. And she's kind of like, you know, the Ashman has to be made out of something dead, and Ella's like, that's fucking weird, I'm not doing that. And then little girl's like, I'm not gonna tell you the next part of the story if you don't fucking do it. And then Ella's like, no, I'll just figure it out on my own. But of course she can't, because one of the themes of this movie is trying to find your creative voice. So then she goes to visit her mom and apologizes for not finishing the Cyclops film, but then she tells her, oh, I've started my own film. And then she kind of has this moment where she's like thinking about that, and she's like, except it wasn't really mine, was it? And so, because of all this confusion, she decides to go to the club where Tom's sister and Tom hang out, and she asks the sister for drugs. And it's so funny because the sister keeps trying to get her to come in for, like, an interview to work at the place she works, and after she goes into the bathroom at the club, she like gets the drugs, goes into the bathroom, comes out, and tells the sister she would kill herself if she had to work at a place like that. And you're like, wow, that's harsh. Okay. And then she is just, like, tripping balls, man. Like, there's this dummy head talking to her, and there's all this weird shit happening. And we get some vocalization from the little girl going on in the background where she's telling her to look for it, find it, whatever the fuck that means. And then she and Tom go off and have sex at the club, which, like, do they have sex rooms at clubs? Like, why do they have sex rooms at clubs? That seems, like, really unsanitary and just, like, you're gonna get an STD from sitting down. Like, I don't understand why that would be a thing. Anyway, when she comes out, she's still doing her weird trippy thing, and there's this really cool atmospheric music going on, which apparently there was no composer for this film. The director found this musician and her experimental music and was like, this is what I want for the film. So that's pretty cool. But anyway, there's a fight after she and Tom do the deed, and this guy smashes a bottle against another guy's head, and that guy who had the bottle smashed on his head kind of, like, is woozy and kneeling on the ground and looking up, so Ella goes over and just starts playing in his head wound. And I mean that literally playing in it and touching it and just, like, touching the folds where his forehead came apart. Like, it is so gross. She's just playing with this fucking nasty cut on her head, and then on his head. And the little girl is there too, and she's, like, guiding her hand. And it's gross. This, for whatever reason, is, like, the turning point for Ella. She goes into the woods to get the fox carcass, and the little girl is there, and she records a little bit in a voice recording device that Ella had previously tried to use, and then replays it, and instead of it being the little girl's voice, it's Ella's voice. And Ella says, talking to yourself is the first sign of madness, and the little girl says, look who's talking. So, at this point, like, the little girl is Ella. Like, it's her inner child, her creativity coming to life. So little Ella says the Ashman comes on 3 nights. On the first night, he sees her. Then little Ella says, of course, he has to be made out of something dead. And then Ella agrees, picks up the fox, takes it back. And then we get this nasty, squelchy fox cutting scene. And it's so gross. Like, the sound design in this movie just makes you want to, like, wash your ears out. Like, I don't understand how it does that, but it does. So after Ella is done cutting apart this fox and turning it into the Ashman, we see the Ashman is now, like, grossly hairy and has, like, little teethy coming out of his mouth in, like, a weird circular way. It's just very unsettling. And then little Ella tells the story again. So she's like, you know, he sees her, she tries to hide, but the Ashman sees her. And then we hear the door buzzer sound, and Ella ignores it, but it buzzes again. And every time she tries to take a photo, the buzzer goes off. So she answers the phone, and of course it's heavy breathing. Like, when is it not heavy breathing in a horror movie? If you're in a horror movie and you're answering the phone, you're either getting ghost face or heavy breathing. There's no in between. So then she, like, looks out the window and she sees the silhouette of someone standing at the apartment building, like it's their shadow being cast. And she goes and looks down the stairwell, and it's the fucking Ashman, but he's, like, fully human-sized. Which, fuck that. I'm ejecting myself out that window. No thank you, on so many levels. He's walking to her floor and then to her apartment, and he bangs on her door. And she's, like, cowering, of course, because what the fuck. And then he seemingly, like, leaves. Like, you hear his little foot stomps, like, fading. But when she looks in the peephole, he's looking back at her. And then the next morning, Tom finds Ella asleep on the floor in her workroom. And he's like, did you take something? And she reveals that she has the drugs on her still. Like, she pulls them out of her sock. She didn't take them. So she's just tripping in her own mind because she's gone mad. She's fucking lost it, I guess. And then she tells Tom, she's like, the man in my movie visited me. And he's like, no, look, you animated it. See, that's what you animated. And so she's, like, insistent, like, I want to leave. And so Tom takes her to his house. And while she's in the shower, she gets weird again. Her skin starts, like, moving like Mortician's wax. And then, of course, like, it's gone in an instant. And then she just, like, seems distant throughout the day and lies awake even as Tom is asleep. And then when she opens her eyes, she's back at the apartment, and the girl from her film walks in and climbs up the bed, touches her skin on her thigh, and then it pulls apart, which is foreshadowing. And also really fucking gross. Like, she literally, like, this little figure does not have fingers. It just has, like, nub hands. And it just literally, like, puts them down on her skin, and pulls her skin apart. It's so weird. Then it's morning again. That was all a dream. Morning again, she's really at Tom's, and Tom asked how she slept, and she says good. And so they go to breakfast, and Tom is doing very good supportive boyfriend things, to his credit. And he even makes, like, a joke to cheer her up, and it's really funny. And like, he really is, for most of this movie, just being a good supportive boyfriend. Like, he even tells her later, like, I thought you were going through something, so I'm trying to help you. And that's basically what he's doing. Like, he's offering her, like, all the space she wants. He's like, it's really just, it's good. But, of course, Ella is unhinged, and not in a fun way. She sees little Ella behind him at this diner, and she's slurping the juice box. Not the jukebox. Wow. She's slurping a juice box. And so that kind of draws Ella's attention out of this nice moment, which is kind of like, it's kind of like a metaphor for how obsession works, really, which is nice. And so then they're at Tom's again, and she tells Tom that she wants to go back. And he's like, you don't have to keep going back. Like, you can come over here. And it's kind of like, in a way, an addiction to Ella. And so he, like, offers her a job at his place, at, like, the place he works. But it's clear that that's not what she wants. And she's a little, like, condescending about, like, going to an office and getting a job. And, like, it's just not what she wants. Which, like, I get, but at the same time, people have to have those jobs for the world to circulate. So, like, maybe be a little bit more understanding and grateful that someone puts on a suit and goes to work every fucking day. But instead, she goes to his sister's work, which is great, because she literally is like, if I had to work there, I would kill myself. And ta-da, now she's here. And she gets told by, like, one of the directors to make eyes. And she's also disappointed because she thought she'd be animating. And the sister is, like, not help at all. Like, she's just like, okay, bye. And she's like, wait, what? And so as she's, like, rolling these little eyes, one of her coworkers, he like, kind of fangirls a little bit. He says he grew up watching her mom's films in uni, he says, or university, as Americans would say. And he says, must have been amazing growing up in that environment. And Ella's face is like, yeah, kind of a face, which is, it's amazing. She doesn't say anything back, so he shuts up, and she just goes back to rolling these eyes. And then she's wandering around and finds that Tom's sister has decided to make Ella's movie. Like, she literally, like, turns a corner, and there's a set, and on the set is, like, a new little armature little girl. And then behind there, there's, like, the mood board, and it's literally pictures from Ella's apartment. And so she's pissed, obviously, and the sister's like, well, you weren't gonna do it, so I decided I would do it, which, like, she's fucking doing it, you asshole, just not in the same studio you are, and fuck off and die. Maybe not literally. I'm taking it back, that second part. They get into a fight, and Ella rips off the little armature's head and gets kicked out, obviously. So then she goes to, like, visit her mom, and she's literally, like, doing stop motion with her mom's arm. Like, she's taking it and moving it and taking a picture with her cell phone, and then moving it a little bit more and taking a picture. And then her mom kind of, like, comes to life, so to speak, to talk to her, and she says, it's a wonderful medium, isn't it? Bringing dead things to life. And, of course, like, that's just the running theme is this is a form of necromancy, which I kind of think that's hilarious, like, of all the things. Which, to be fair, if anything is, like, living in slightly wrong, I would say it's stop motion. Like, cartoon typically seems a little bit more smooth and a little bit more lifelike, whereas stop motion, yeah, it feels like you're bringing a dead thing to life, which feels wrong. And not like that's a bad thing or it's done in a bad way. It just feels weird, especially when you're looking at the process and a lot of the different things you can do with stop motion and a lot of things you can't do with stop motion. But anyway, so Ella is told by her mom that her imagination is morbid. And Ella's like, well, so's yours. And the mom's like, yeah, but the difference between you and me is that I can control it and you can't. And Ella takes this very offensively, like her mom has insulted her, and is kind of like, well, I'm living my life, and you're here dying, bitch. But the mom says she's a puppet caught in her own strings. And then something that I didn't, like, register, like, I was kind of like, what the fuck does that mean? The mom says when the puppets are done with their play, they're put back in the box. And so that's kind of important for the ending. And so now, it is the second night. The Ashman cometh back, and this time he toucheth her. Ella's like, no. And the little girl is like, no, that's what happens. And Ella's like, no, the little girl escapes, and the Ashman doesn't touch her, and she's good to go. And she's like, no, that's not what happened. And Ella's like, well, it's my movie, and I'm gonna make it my way. And the little girl's like, fine, have it your way. And as Ella films, there's like this knocking that rattles her table. And of course, she does not escape. She gets touched very the fuck up by the Ashman, and not like in weird places, just like her face. He does this weird, like, he just is touching her face, and he's got these weird, like, fin hands. It's so fucking weird, and he's just touching her face. Yeah, she gets very touched, and it's very cool and very creepy. Like, it's so cool the way he, like, appears, because he rises up out of the set, and the set is like, it's like a table, and he just rises up out of the set, and Ella tries to run, but then her legs, like, get mushy, as if, like, kind of like a Ben Armstrong figure, where you, like, turn the limbs, like, that's what it kind of looks like, and then she becomes a tiny stop-motion creature, and the Ashman is, like, he's so, like, slurpy and gross, and he's just nasty, and he's trying to reach her, but she goes into this hole in the wall, and then on the other side of this, like, room she's in, there's another hole that she's trying to get into, and that is, this other room that she's trying to get into is lined with, like, this golden satin, and it's kind of, like, ringed, like, it just looks very, like, fancy and soft and safe, and she doesn't make it, and then the Ashman touches the fuck out of her face, of course, the nasty little guy, and then he spits out a black ball, and it's the egg from the beginning. It's supposed to be the egg from the beginning, and he puts it in Ella's mouth and forces her to eat it, which is, like, big gross. Big gross. Do not kiss a no more, Tom. And then it cuts to her writhing on the floor, and then the egg from the beginning, and then little Ella is like, I told you, fucking little bitch. And then Ella wakes up in the hospital, which, like, typically I don't want to wake up in the hospital, but if the alternative is being touched by the Ashman, like, if that's what happened before, yeah, take me to the hospital, that's fine. Apparently she was found wandering near her building, and the nurse says they're keeping her overnight for observation, and she's got, like, a nasty cut on her leg. And Tom is mucho concerno. He's very upset. Ella's like, I didn't do it on purpose. And, like, you can see his sister in the waiting room, and she looks guilty as shit. And Tom, like, tries to be a good boyfriend again and tells her she can make her videos, but, like, she just needs to get better first. And he suggests, like, collabing with him, like, you can make videos for my music. And she's like, you don't make music, Tom. And it's like, wow! She's like, you put on a suit and go to work every day. And it's like, bitch, a man can have a side hustle, calm down. And then, like, of course that triggers him, and they get into a spat because she's being a bitch and condescending and all of that, and he tells her he thought she was going through something, was trying to help her, but, like, he's done. He threatens to go over to the flat and delete the film and just, like, clear it all out of stuff, and Ella begs him to let her do it. She tells him she understands, like, I get it, this is bad for me, but I need to finish what I started. And he's like, no. And you're like, what? And then he's like, we'll do it together in the morning. And you're like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. I wouldn't trust her alone in there either. So yeah, he like, that's kind of like the best option, is he's like, I'll drive you over there and I'll watch you do it. Which is like, like, when he says that he's done, I thought he was breaking up with her, but he's like, no, I'm just done with this weird, unhinged insanity thing you've got going on. Which, valid. So later on, she gets wheeled down the hall where a doctor apologizes to her, and it's pretty obvious, like, her mother's dead. So she goes to pay her respects, and little Ella interrupts her, and she's like, are we done here? And you're like, wow, what a fucking bitch. But, like, little Ella is kind of like that. And I think for, like, a very good reason. Like, I will talk about that at the end. But So Ella breaks into her flat with little Ella, and she is like hardcore limping, and little Ella is setting up the film stuff and says the fox meat doesn't work anymore because it's all dried out, and she goes, we need something more bleedy, and you're like, okay, that's not scary at all. Ella asks little Ella to come closer, and she's like, why? And she's like, because I want to have a look at you. And then she strangles her to death. Like, she like gets on this kid and just strangles the fuck out of her, and she's dead. And Ella begins to cry, but then little Ella pops up behind her and is basically like, are you done? Got that out of your system? Cool. Let's get working. And like the first time I watched it, I was just like, oh my god. The second time I laughed. It's like the only funny thing in this whole film. And little Ella says, it's okay, we're nearly there, you know, and Ella's like, I'm scared. She's like, it's okay, it's gonna be great, and it's something that only you could have made. And then she says, great artists always put themselves into their work. So of course, like, then we get Ella opening up her leg wound and tearing off bits of her flesh. So that's cool. It's more of that gross stuff from the club coming back, and then it's also, you know, the little wax figure ripping her leg apart. That's coming back, and now she's trying to rip little pieces of flesh off her own leg, which is, lovely, and it's very graphic, and, maybe stay away from that if you're not good with that kind of stuff, like body horror type stuff. And as she's doing that, Tom and his sister come in, and they're just, like, flabbergasted, and Ella's just like, get out! And you're like, oh my god. Like, I would have fucking left. I definitely would have fucking left. I would have called the police. I would have had backup come. Like, I would have been like, yeah, okay, you're totally off the rails now. But no, Tom and his sister, like, grab Ella and try and drag her out and forcibly remove her. But then Ella ends up killing them, like, super brutally. Like, she kicks the sister in the face, and then she takes the camera and just beats the sister in the face a couple times, and then stabs her through the throat. And then Tom, she goes downstairs, because he had fallen down the stairs when she kicked the sister, and he's like, help me, like, really weakly. And she grabs his mouth and his nose, like she did in the beginning with his nose, but she grabs his mouth too and covers them until he stops breathing. So that's nice. And then Ella drags the bodies back into the flat and uses the fresh bodies to make more of her film. Yay! And so the character is, like, because she has, like, all this new material. It's not a joke, but it's kind of funny, but it's not. All this new material, she gets to make large characters. Like, the armature, like, there's no armature anymore, basically, because they're, like, children-sized body doubles, children-sized, mannequins of these two characters, the little girl in the story, and then also the Ashman, which is really fucking gross. And of course, Ella's, like, kind of stumbling from blood loss and exhaustion, and the Ashman stalks toward her. First he stalks toward the flesh girl first, and then turns towards Ella, and little Ella doesn't seem to know what's going on. Like, she literally says, this isn't what happened. And so Ella is like, well, fuck that. And then she goes and hides in a closet. And the Ashman bangeth on the door. And he opens the door crazy fast and rushes inside. Like, it's practically a jump scare. It freaked me out the way how fast he opens the door and gets in. It's very spooky, and I didn't like it, but I do like it. As they stand in the closet, Ella is, like, feeling her face, and it starts, like, coming apart like the mortician's wax. Like, she's just, like, peeling into her face, and it's just a ball of wax. And she offers the wax to the Ashman, and he starts eating it. And then she starts messing up her face more, and he starts messing up her face more, and they're, like, she's still offering bits of her face to him, and then, like, at some point he's just, like, eating off of her face, and we get cuts with the egg from the beginning, and then it finally, like, splits and cracks open. And in the woods now, Ella finds the bungalow. Like, she finds the actual building, and inside, little Ella is on a stool looking at the film on the laptop. And we see the camera panning, and like, on the laptop film, and we see that Ella herself is on the ground, and she's, like, clutching the control pad and twitching, and she's very pale, and her breathing's shallow, and then she just stops completely. Like, oh my gosh, she fucking dead. And then Ella walks over to the chest in the corner and opens it, and inside it's that golden satin like material that's like kind of ringed along the sides. And as she like walks over to the chest and she opens it, little Ella says, "I love it." And then Ella smiles and just gets inside the box. And that's the end of the movie, which is just, you know, peaches and gravy, man. This is a great ending. Butterflies and rainbows. It's just amazing. So to talk about like the themes of this film, obviously we have the necromancy and work taking on a life of its own. Those are like two confirmed themes from the director, and obviously, I mean, you can see them very prevalently throughout the film, both in the actions and then also just like the characters pointing out constantly that you're bringing something dead to life. So that's kind of like the theme. And then, you know, she's putting actual flesh on these armatures, so she's literally trying to do necromancy and eventually ends up dead because, I don't know, just you can't do that stuff. But then, so something that I found really interesting is the egg concept, and the egg is kind of it's not necessarily like her sanity. It's something like her creativity kind of hatching and cracking open and becoming its own thing. And that's kind of another, like I said, it's kind of the other theme, is work taking on a life of its own. So like this egg represents her creativity, and finally it has come to life completely at the end of her film and at the end of her life, unfortunately, because she dumb as fuck. But then the other thing I want to talk about is the story little Ella puts out and how it ties into Ella and Ella's mom. And so someone else came up with this on Reddit, and I've kind of taken it and run with it a little bit. But they kind of suggested that something bad happened to Ella as a child. And I think that that's very true. I think the Ashman is representative of someone who knew Ella as a kid and was kind of preying on her. And that's why the Ashman comes on 3 nights. And like, you know, the first night he sees her, and the second night he touches her, and then the third night is like complete bonkers fucked up, and he's just tearing at her face and her mind, and he's just destroying her. And so that sounds an awful lot like child rape. Sorry, I'd never said any trigger warnings for that at the beginning. I apologize. But that's essentially what it's kind of like symbolic of. And so that's why this room is red, because red is a very aggressive color. It's fearful, it's blood, it's destruction. And then she is a puppet. And so the puppetry stuff is, it's both the downfall of Ella and the saving grace of Ella, because Ella wants to crawl back into the puppet chest at the end. She wants to be a puppet, not caught in her own strings. She wants to be told what to do, and that's because she has been told what to do her whole life. Like, I have no doubts that Ella's mom probably knew something was weird with, like, maybe she didn't know, she just didn't pay enough attention, actually. Like, she didn't care what was happening with Ella, and so she, you know, the mom is very much engrossed in her work. That's her main focus. We see that, we understand that, like, it's just a very obvious character piece for the mother. And so in a situation like this, where the mother is not focused on the child at all, gives like 0 fucks, and there's no dad, like, we don't ever get a mention of Ella's dad. So it makes me wonder if Ella's mom was a single mom, or if the dad left or died, or what. Or maybe he was there and just not prevalent part of her life. I kind of think that the mom was a single mom, like that maybe Ella was an oops baby with a one-night stand, or maybe Ella, maybe she was married and then he divorced her because her obsession with work. I don't know, but either way, I do think Ella's mom was a single mom raising her. And so her focus being on work means her focus is never on her kid. And like, Ella is her puppet, so unless she's directly controlling her strings, in her mind, Ella is locked away. Like, Ella is in a different space doing whatever. And so because Ella is a child that is repressed and only doing what she is told to do, that really leaves her open to a predator stepping in and doing something atrocious to her, which I think is that's why little Ella is so insistent on, no, this is what happens, and this is what happened. And, you know, she's insistent on, this is the story, and you can't change it because I think it happened. I think to some extent the Ashman is an actual person previously in Ella's life who abused her. And more than likely it was because Ella was a child who was raised to just do what you're told, shut up, don't ask questions, you don't have your own voice, you are a puppet. And that's like very like heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, but I also think that kind of gives this movie an extra layer of depth and an extra layer of just kind of like rewatchability, because the first time I didn't notice much of that, and then the second time I'm taking my notes for the podcast, and so obviously I am noticing those things. So again, this movie is very emotionally taxing, especially when you think of it in these ways with these themes, and when you have this interpretation present in your mind. Yeah, very taxing. So, like, I think if I ever watched this again, I would have to have a few beers or, like, be with someone who's watching it for the first time. But I mean, and that doesn't mean that it's not a good movie. It's just that it is exhausting emotionally, especially if you are someone who, has gone through some stuff like that. So, thank you guys for listening. Appreciate your patience with the podcast. Hopefully things are settled down enough that they can come out regularly. And thank you for listening. I appreciate that a lot. You can find me on Rumble, Beware the Moon Podcast over there. I'm also Beware the Moon Podcast on YouTube. On Twitter, I am at Beware Moon. So hit me up any of those places. If you catch me live streaming, feel free to talk horror movies with me. Thanks very much, guys, and I hope you have a good one. Enjoy your day, enjoy your week, enjoy your life, enjoy your year, enjoy not being a puppet.